Appreciate the time to be here. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about just big data in general and maybe how it has some application to the marketing side of things. And so talking a little bit just more about my background, I'm in a kind of a product strategy group today where we're looking at how do we leverage a lot of the data that we have in our infrastructure today, both internally as well as external data, to make our products better and in the process, marketing to our prospects better. So we talked a little bit about this already. How many people here have ever heard of Concur or used our products? A couple of you? Okay, that's pretty good. And so for those that don't, we do travel and expense management. We're about a 19-year-old company headquartered in Seattle, Washington. Just here are some of the stats that we have around our users. I live right here kind of in the middle of the country. I was in Seattle for a long time, and then I got married. And after I got married, I think I missed something as I was talking to my wife, but as soon as we had kids, we moved back to her hometown. So I wasn't really listening. So, all right, so talking a little bit about the agenda, I think we'll talk a little bit about the hype, we'll talk about what's big, and we'll come up with some examples. I want to kind of demystify this a little bit. I think in a lot of cases, there's so much marketing hype around this that it's not super constructive. And so my hope here is today to give you some concrete examples of how to think about this as we go forward. These are just some of the articles that were kind of taken out of press just recently. I mean, if you've read anything about this, there's a lot of information around this. And basically, I think, to be honest, I think we're in this kind of trough of disillusionment. I think there's a ton of data, there's a ton of expectations about how we're going to use it. But right now, it's not something that's being executed very well. And I say that for my own company as well as a lot of the industry. I think we're in very early days of putting all this data together and normalizing it and having the skills to actually take action on it. And so I've got two examples here that I think are kind of interesting. How many people know of Norah Jones? Most people? Okay. So Norah Jones actually took her first album to, I think there were 7 different studios and was rejected across the board. And this company, Polyphonics, actually built a machine learning system that looked at all of the hits that were coming out and basically looking at what the notes were and making corollaries to it. And so they built basically a computer program that basically looked at historical data from a music standpoint and then took Norah Jones's information on her album and put it through. And what did it say? It said there'd be 8 hits off of that album. And it went on to sell 11 million copies. And so kind of an interesting application to large sums of data and providing it to an economics that really makes sense. This next one is actually a local London company that I think it was started in 2003. And basically the problem that one was trying to solve was looking at marketing budgets for big kind of blockbuster Hollywood movies. And so the groups that were funding these things were saying, I spend so much money on the production of this, getting the actors, and then how much do I need to promote this to actually maximize the amount of ticket sales I'm going to get? And so this company basically looked at all of the different aspects around a movie, whether it's the actors in it, the script, how much they spent on marketing, and to look and see what the most important characteristics were. And see if they could build a predictive engine that says, based on those characteristics, could I tell you what your ticket sales were going to be? And what they turned out to be was the script was the most important thing. And so they did, and basically the studio said, I don't believe you at all. And so they basically did an experiment where they gave them 10 movies to try, and within 7 of them, they predicted within 10% of the gross spend for ticket sales. So pretty important application to it. And so I've got a couple slides here in the middle that I'm going to buzz through just in the sake of time. I think one of the trends that we're seeing is, and you guys all get it. I mean, there's just an incredible amount of data that's being created every single day. 4 billion pieces of content are shared on Facebook every day. I'm sure a lot of that's duplicate, but we talked about YouTube in the last one, and 2 billion videos being watched on YouTube every single day. That's pretty impressive. I'm sure that takes away from some productivity. This is one that's maybe a little bit more US-centric, but talking about the Library of Congress in the United States, which is a collection of all of the materials, they're saying more companies have that data than the Library of Congress, 15 out of 17. So again, just an incredible amount of data. This one, you've seen this one probably in a lot of media clips as well. just saying 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years. And so just escalating. And then the last one is you've got all this data, and then more and more people are consuming it, but the number of people that are actually going to be online that are creating more and more of that. And so it's just an exponential curve, which I think brings us to some of the problems that we have, or some of the ways that we talk about big data. We talk about the volume of it, which we just talked about, the velocity. We're talking about Twitter here as an example in the last discussion, just huge volumes of information. But these last two, to me, are the ones where I struggle, and we spend a lot of time talking about it. Just the variety. How do you take all this data that's structured and unstructured, put it together in a way that you can normalize it and do some sort of action on it? It's not simple stuff. And I think as we're getting more and more content sources, this becomes a bigger and bigger issue. The last one is big as well, back here, which is just around the veracity of it. And it's just the data quality. So it's great to have tons of data, but if it's not consolidated, it's not structured well, and it's not accurate, it doesn't matter what you can do with it. And so I think these are, when we talk about big data in general, these are some of the concepts that we talk about. So I have kind of two kind of marketing related examples that I want to kind of quickly go through, and then we'll get to some ones that are more Concur specific and within our organization. This one's kind of interesting. So there's an economist at Princeton, Ashenfelder, and he liked to collect wine. So he would be one of these guys that would basically buy some Bordeaux from a region in France, hold on to it for 10 years, and then basically sell those bottles off. And the way he did this was he would basically try to collect a bunch of information. He would read newsletters. These newsletters were very expensive, $15,000 to $20,000 a year. And what he was finding was they weren't worth anything. And so he went off and basically said, let me start looking at all the characteristics that go into making wine and figure out if there's some corollaries and which ones are the most important. And so he built a model, and he had all of these elements to it that he thought were the most important. And really what it boiled down to was a formula that was based around number of days of sunshine, number of days of rain, and average temperature. And that was way more accurate than any of the other information that was out there. And as you can imagine, the people that are in that industry were just in an uproar. But this guy is making a ton of money doing this, and he provides it as a service today. Another interesting application of big data. This last one here is kind of maybe more near and dear to the travel industry that I participate in, and it was a US regional carrier, and what they were looking for was they were saying every time a flight leaves, there's usually some seats on it that haven't been bought from either a business or a first class cabin. And so the problem that they started to look at was saying, who should I offer it to? Should I offer it to somebody that doesn't even have a frequent flyer mile with me, has no loyalty programs, that's just using the service? I don't know anything about them. Maybe this is a way to get them integrated to a frequent flyer loyalty program. Or was it number two, somebody that's kind of maybe a mid-tier gold that flies frequently, you have pretty good transparency, and you want to entice them to stay on your airline? Or the third category was the premium flyer, the guy that's flying all the time. And so let's just do a quick show of hands. What do you think? Where do you give up the business class ticket? Do you give it to the guy that doesn't have any status at all? Okay. Do you give it to the guy that's the mid-level one? Okay, there's one. Okay, maybe a third. Or do you give it to the premium flyer? Okay. What's interesting is you guys are all about a third across the board, which is interesting. It's not an easy problem. What they found was you were best off giving it to the guy that was kind of the mid-level. And the reason why was if you give it to the guy that's in the mid-level and he gets a taste of business class, he may buy a business class ticket going forward. Whereas the guy that had no loyalty, he did it, but he never signed up for a loyalty program at all. And then the guy that was the premium flyer basically had already been buying those types of tickets, right? They were used to being upgraded. And so when they didn't get upgraded, in a lot of cases, they actually bought the ticket. And so they changed their behavior, and they started to understand what's the cost of value for each one of those types of people. It was an interesting process. So to me, this is kind of the money slide of the presentation. I think that people think about big data as a destination, and what I'm trying to talk a little bit about is think about it more as a continuum within your organization. If you think about it here all the way from the left, when this talking about simple analytics, maybe you think about it from a demand funnel standpoint. You got to aggregate data, and you got to put some BI tool to actually do some reporting on it. In this second area, you're starting to get more and more complex. Maybe it's part of your lead scoring process, and you're doing a little bit more complex analytics around it. And then as you move further and further down here, this is what they traditionally talk about from a big data standpoint, but this is more predictive analytics, using some of the historical data you have to predict maybe what's going to happen in the future. And so when I'm talking to people in my organization, I don't talk in the frame of whether it's big data or not. I talk to them about what problem do you want to solve, and then where does it fit in this continuum. And so I believe probably every single one of your organizations fits somewhere in here. And as you continue to move to the right with more and more complexity, you can answer different questions. But that's what it really starts with. And so, even just kind of building on this. So the next kind of 3 slides that I have are things that we're doing at Concur, things that we've either already done or in the process around kind of more complex analytics. Some of them are big data specific. But the first one is something you guys are all probably pretty familiar with, the demand funnel. And so what we ended up doing about 4 years ago was really introducing the whole concept of demand funnel. It wasn't something that was part of our vernacular. It wasn't something that we did across our business. But once we did, then we had a kind of a common language that we could all talk. And then what we started to do was to kind of use reverse waterfall, right? And saying, I know what the revenue targets are for the next year. I know what my conversion rates are on it. Now I can go back and reverse engineer what I need for each one of these steps. Pretty simple process, but it took us some time to do it. The next one I think is interesting was 4 years ago, we started off with a lead scoring process that we didn't have to start with. And so just recently, probably in the last 6 months, we started doing some linear regression and some cluster analysis to say, was the lead characteristics that we thought were important, are they important? And the answer turned out to be no, or maybe. We ended up looking at it and saying we built a kind of a lead scoring system for all of our leads, but they were different between our enterprise customers and our SMB customers. And so quickly we started saying, hey, look, we should probably have a different lead scoring process for these large market clients as well as what we should have for our small to mid-sized businesses. Then we started looking at by segment. We started looking at by vertical. And sure enough, a lot of the characteristics and the assumptions that we had early out of the gate turned out to not be the case. But with data and some pretty simple statistics, you can reach this type of information. And so if you guys have been doing this for a while, and you have some questions on whether your lead scoring process is really the right criteria with the right emphasis, this may be something that you can work with your marketing operations group to do. And then the last one for me, which is ongoing, is we have a lot of different distribution channels. We have a lot of marketing different assets that we use. And so in a lot of cases, we produce reports that say almost every single one of our leads was influenced by marketing, 95%. And that just drives me nuts because it's saying you leverage 15 different assets against this, and it was marketing influence. Well, that's great, but which one of those helped at which point in time during the demand funnel? And so we're doing a bunch of analysis now to try to isolate that says which one of these assets were the most important to moving it down the stage of the demand funnel. And that could be different by segment. It could be different by large market or enterprise or our SMB clients. And so this is an ongoing project that we have. But what we're starting to do is get some really good insights. Some things were totally apparent, like in enterprise. A lot of our stuff is a lot more white glove treatment. A lot of it's much more one-on-one. But if a client already has an expense or travel solution, they have some different collateral that works better with them. If they already know who Concur is, obviously there's some differences. And so we're starting to get to the point where we're starting to tailor based on the criteria of the individual, what are the best assets to do it, instead of just kind of a shotgun approach, which is a lot of what we've done in the past. So I'll leave you with this. I think the question that I think is interesting is you have all of this data, and let's say that your marketing operations it has it all kind of aggregated and normalized. Think about the business problem you want to solve. Don't think about it as a big data problem or not. Think about it as what is the business problem I'm trying to solve. And I think there's probably folks in your organization from a technology standpoint that can help figure out what are the tools and assets that are the best way to solve it. Okay, thank you.